Well, good evening, everyone. We are going to go ahead and get started because we want to take full advantage of our time together this evening. First of all, welcome, welcome, welcome. We are delighted that you all are joining us tonight for what will be a wonderful and informative conversation with Rob Santos, who is the director of the U.S. Census Bureau. And you will learn a lot more about him tonight, but I just want to mention two things. One is that he is the 26th director of the U.S. Census Bureau, and the other is that he is the first Latino to hold that position. So we are very, very proud of him, and we are delighted. And we actually think of him as one of us, frankly, because he is from Texas. He is from San Antonio, just down the road, and his wife is from Houston. So he is definitely one of us. So we are especially delighted to have him here to talk about the census, the importance of the census, and why we have to really do some work for the 2030 census. There's a lot that we'll cover, but first, what I want to mention is that I want to say a few thanks to some folks. Of course, we need to say thanks to the Museum of Fine Arts Houston for allowing us to use this beautiful space. And also, we need to say thanks to the PNC Bank for sponsoring our series, the KI Forum series, which is our signature speaker series. We usually have about 2 of these per year. And thank you to PNC Bank for sponsoring the series for this year. And in a moment, I'm going to ask Julie Sutter to come up to say a few words. But before I do, bless you, or no, that's not a bless you. There should be something that we should say, right, when somebody coughs? Something like bless you, but there isn't anything. There's a shush, yeah, shh, no coughing allowed. We should come up with something nice to say when somebody coughs. But in any case, what I wanted to mention is that after our conversation, we are going to leave plenty of time for Q&A. And so you all should have already received a little note card, correct? Good. Everyone should have received. If you didn't pick one up, make sure you get one, a note card as you came in. And so what we want you to do is as you listen to the conversation, if you hear anything that makes you want to ask a question, a follow-up question, please jot that down. And toward the end of the conversation, there will be some folks from the Kinder Institute that will be walking up and down the aisles collecting those cards. So make sure that you write down some good questions. We'll try to get to as many of them as possible. And the other thing to note about the questions, and this is because I got Rob's permission to say this, he welcomes tough questions. He said this. So definitely if you have tough questions, make sure that you jot those down as well. And and then the last thing that I'm supposed to mention is that we are tonight's conversation is being followed through social media. And so if you want to make some remarks through social media, please use hashtag KI Forum. That's hashtag KI Forum. Okay, so with that, as I mentioned earlier, we are delighted that PNC Bank has sponsored the KI Forum series this year, and so I would like to invite Julie Sutter to come up and say a few words. Julie is the president of PNC Bank Houston. Welcome, Julie.
Thank you, Ruth. It's always hard to follow an amazing speaker like Ruth, but I'm just delighted to be here for tonight's forum. My name, as Ruth said, is Julie Young-Suddath, and I'm the regional president for PNC Bank here locally. As a national bank with a local delivery model, we're able to identify and support events like this that really matter to Houstonians. It's events like this that give local leaders and organizations, data that they need to make decisions that are beneficial to everyone. These forums are allowing us to hear about ideas on the most pressing issues faced today, so I look forward to hearing all those hard questions as well. Part of today's discussion is about reaching communities that have historically been undercounted by the U.S. Census Bureau. And I'm particularly excited to hear the discussion because PNC's made an incredible investment in reaching communities that are under-resourced, particularly those that are unbanked or underbanked, as we say. We know that if somebody has a limited banking relationship or not one at all, that it can have really negative ripple effects across their financial lives. And so here in Houston, to address that, we've launched a mobile branch unit that's dedicated to making stops across specific neighborhoods that are now enjoying regular access to financial services. And this is just one way we deliver on our main purpose, which is to help everyone, all, move forward financially. So we're really proud to work with the organization of the Kinder Institute that has such a beautiful vision for inclusive prosperity, where everyone has a chance to contribute to Houston's success and share in opportunities. And that's what I love about the Kinder Institute, supporting it as a funder and as an advisory board member. So with no further delay, I'm going to turn it over to Ruth and Robert. And thanks for having me.
Thanks, Julie. Okay, so before we get started with this conversation, as many of you know, I have like a script, a few notes here and there, but I don't usually follow it. So I'm going to start off by not following the script, by mentioning something that happened as Rob and I were walking into the auditorium just a few moments ago, and a woman approached us and introduced herself. So I have to give a shout out to Ms. Dolores Santos, there she is, who walked up and said hello and introduced herself, and then immediately Rob asked, "Are we related?" And I, like you, I laughed because I thought, my last name is López, and if anybody with the last name of López comes up to me, and if I ask, "Are we related?" I mean, how dumb is that, right? Like, how many Lópezes are there? But she said, "Yes, we're cousins." I couldn't believe it.
I couldn't believe it either. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yes.
Familia.
Yes.
Mi prima.
And then I assumed he had invited her to come, and he didn't even know that she would be here. So this is great. This is going to be a great evening. So yes, shout out to Ms. Dolores Santos. But to get us started, of course, we want to talk about the census. There's a lot to talk about there. But before we talk about the census per se, we have to talk about you. So I would love for you to share a little bit about your journey, and especially in terms of how you came to do what you are doing now, and especially because it's quite different from what you've been doing before in some ways. Not in other ways, it's not that different, right? But yeah, tell us a little bit about your journey.
Sure. And if you don't mind, I'm going to start way back, but I'll be short. So much of who I am is because of my Mexican-American culture. And so I'd like to start out by saying all four of my grandparents were refugees. They came during the Mexican Revolution in the early 1900s. They crossed the Mexican-Texas border and settled in San Antonio. Mm-hmm. And so I am, if you count them as 0, I'm the second generation. If you count them as 1, I'm the third generation. Mm-hmm. I've heard both. The demographer will have to tell me which one's right. Depends on who you talk to, right? And because of that, they brought my grandparents brought and instilled in my parents the culture, the language, etc. And part of that was Catholicism, of which then I proceeded to have 12 years of parochial high school. First by the Irish nuns at Little Flower School in San Antonio, and then at Holy Cross. And those, the Mexican culture combined with the values that I was taught in there actually spurred a couple of things in me. The first is I emerged from high school with a love for mathematics and an absolute passion for helping people. So, since I'm a first-gen I was a first-gen college student. I thought you could graduate high school in May, look at colleges in June, apply in July, and go in September. And even back then, it doesn't work like that. And so I went to community college for a semester and ended up transferring over to a wonderful liberal arts university. And then from there went to graduate school. But the other aspect that really influenced me and who I am as a leader was that I got married very early. So,
Oh, really?
yeah.
How early? Me
At
too.
18. In fact, it was right after my second semester, after my first year of undergrad. During the second semester, when I transferred to Trinity University, if anybody knows it.
Yes, of course.
Trinity
See
Tigers here.
that.
Yeah. I met my wife in March, and we got married in August. And
Great.
we, in this last
And you're still
August,
married.
we celebrated our 50th anniversary.
Congratulations. That's great. That's great.
So then going to graduate school in Michigan, now my passions were statistics.
Now you've got Michigan,
blue.
folks.
My passions were helping people and statistics.
Yeah.
And I leveraged that to then get jobs in. I ended up being a survey sampler and sampling a survey methodologist, learned that business, and then got involved in actually directing projects and then getting involved in sort of management and C-suite stuff. But the whole time, the two things of statistics and helping people motivated me as a manager, of course, and combined with my culture and my life experiences, ended up drawing me towards a service type of career. So I've been things like the president of the American Statistical Association, right? I'm the least published president that there ever was, because I focused on helping people, helping researchers understand really what's going on. Because all too often over my 40-year career, I ended up being the sole Latino, the sole person of color in a room full of decision makers, and things that seemingly seemed a good idea to a non-diverse crowd that had an excellent design, wonderful statistical methods, wonderful analysis. Had they been funded and executed the way they were intended, they would have done more harm than good. And I had to be the person that would sole person raising their hand saying, I don't think we should be doing this, and here's why. And by doing so, I learned that there's value in bringing your whole self to the table. Your culture, your values, your life experience, and your training. And I've been doing that and growing as a leader. And so when I got the call, just as you've gotten a call maybe, about whether to consider.
That was just for you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Just to be a nominee for the director of the census, I said yes, because I knew that I could bring that perspective of valuing diversity, equity, and inclusion to the Census Bureau, because I knew and I'd experienced and lived that it gives you better data, better methods, and more relevant, culturally relevant information that can help communities. So that's why I'm here. That's how I got here.
That's a great story. But what I have to point out is that I actually think it sounds, for a lot of people's ears, it probably sounds a little bit funny to hear. I wanted to do two things: statistics and to help people. And usually when people say I want to help people, you hear something that's more hands-on, right? But statistics,
It's hands-on. Come on.
oh, sure. No, but I actually agree with you. I love statistics too, and I agree with you that I see statistics as a way to help a lot of people, right? At a macro level, if it's done right, it can have an impact on a lot of people. But I'm just very impressed that you saw that connection even at a young age. Was there something in particular that inspired that connection?
Well, what I also learned is that a part of the process, and I do it in statistics and in management, but it literally applies to anything anyone does, whether you're an administrator, in HR, do contracts, whatever. If you bring your whole self to the table, combined with your technical training, whatever it is, that triggers and bolsters. It's like a catalyst for your critical thinking, and you end up coming up with new innovation and new ideas, and you have that unique perspective that no one else has.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been preaching that to all the students that I can. I've been preaching that to mid-level and upper-level type managers because I really believe in it, and I've seen that it works. So that's what I do.
Yeah. Can you give us maybe like one concrete example of a time when your perspective as a Mexican American really helped to inform some, research methodology or some statistical process, something that it made a difference, that your particular perspective changed it?
Certainly, I'll use the example from my first blog. It's on census.gov type of thing, and before I joined, this was actually back in the 90s. I was on a study section for the Agency for Health Quality Research. And what all that means is that they bring people in from all over the country to go and look at grant applications and score them, and so that the highest scored, they get the millions of dollars in research, right? So I was the only Latino there. And I was the only statistician, pure statistician there, and the rest were these like really famous, absolutely famous health service researchers. And there was this proposal that was looking at chronic pain. And this was the time before the Affordable Care Act. And it turned out that before the Affordable Care Act, facilities like ERs and clinics, they still had to see patients even though they didn't have health insurance, and they would take a financial hit. So both on the business side as well as the other side, it was a mess. And so this researcher said, okay, here's an issue, chronic pain. Let's find a way to develop an alternative therapy rather than the conventional like meds and things of that sort that can be used for people without health insurance. And then we're helping them. And the financial institution, not financial, I guess they are, right? No, the healthcare facilities and hospitals, they don't.
Wow, that's a Freudian slip.
Yeah, right. They don't get the financial hit. It's a win-win situation. Who thinks that's a good idea? Don't be shy. Come on. It helps everyone, right? Well, I honestly, because I was a Latino who grew up in the barrio, I knew that everyone deserved, especially the people in my neighborhood. I wouldn't want them to get alternative care. I would want them to get the same care as everyone else. Yep. So I raised my hand. It was a great statistical design, great methods, etc. I raised my hand and I said, I don't think this thing needs to be approved in the way that it's written. Because if it's because if we approve it, then what we are doing is reinforcing a two-tier healthcare system. If you have health insurance, step over to door number 1, and we're going to give you the best meds, the best docs, etc. Huh? You don't have health insurance? Step over to door number 2, and we'll help you think through your pain with transcendental meditation. I said, we can't do this the way it's written. I said, if it's good, if you think if this is good, you guys are the substantive researchers, make it open for everyone. I know plenty of people who have health insurance who don't want to take meds. So open it up for everyone and do your clinical trial. Don't just, focus it on one. Mm-hmm. And they listened. I was scared. I still considered myself a kid, but they did it. And that was the start of me realizing that because of who I am and where I come from, I had a perspective, just like everybody here does, that they can bring to the table that is unique and that adds value to research.
That's absolutely right. Well, thank you for doing that work. And especially now in your role as director of the Census Bureau, I know you're still doing that work in terms of bringing in that perspective and how it informs the census. So now I want to talk about the census, but let's start with, just to make sure that we're all on the same page, can you just say what is the census exactly, and but more importantly, why does it matter so much? Because it's not, some people think of it was just a survey kind of thing, some instrument that I fill out, but that's not really what it is, right? Ultimately. So tell us what it is, what is the census, and why is it so important?
Certainly. Thank you for that question. The Census Bureau is one of 13 federal statistical agencies and by far the largest. Its mission is to provide quality data, statistical data on our population and our economy, so that we understand what's going on, we can do policy and things of that sort. We have like our budget on not a decennial census year, but our budgets nowadays are like 1.6 billion a year. We have about 9,000 or so employees, although that goes up to 350,000 during a census year. And we do 3 censuses. We do a decennial census of the population that's constitutionally mandated. We're the only federal statistical agency with that mandate for the sole reason of apportionment of congressional seats. We do a census of governments, all governments, state, local, etc., and federal. And then we do a economic census. We go out and we capture information from businesses all over the U.S. And on top of that, we do over 130 surveys, starting with our flagship American Community Survey that gathers information it's a treasure trove, everything from poverty to employment, etc. And a ton of other surveys, like 130, both for businesses as well as for the population and housing. When you put all of that together, it's a massive amount of information that comes out almost daily, because we do surveys every single day of the year. We're knocking on somebody's door or a business saying, please give us some information, etc. And our service and our mission is not just to collect it and declare victory, but it's to give it back to the people, to give it back to governments for their governance concerns, to give it back to community-based organizations and counties and cities, and so that planning can be done. And this information ends up being used to allocate up to $2 trillion a year. In 2021, it was 2.8 trillion or 7 trillion because of the additional pandemic funds. But even without that, it would be at the level of $2 billion a year in federal funding to states and local communities. So it really, really does matter to have that information.
Wait, say that again, because I think at one point you said trillion, and the second you said billion, but you meant trillion, right?
Yeah, it's trillion.
Okay, just to make sure.
Trillion.
Yeah.
Let's say it together, folks. Trillion.
Big difference. I just want to make sure that, no, but I mean, so say a little bit more about both of those things. You mentioned the congressional representation, and that's important in and of itself. Say a little bit more about how that works, how the census is tied to that, as well as those trillions of federal dollars and how the census is tied to that.
Certainly. The decennial census is, the primary purpose is used for congressional apportionment. And there's this complex mathematical formula that's used. But if you think about it, when we do a census, they want 50 numbers. That's it. And that's what we first report to the president, and the president gives to Congress for the implementation of the apportionment. 50 state numbers. And it might be like 50 plus Puerto Rico and the territories, but that's basically it. On top of that, the decennial census does redistricting files so that people can draw congressional districts. So that's important, but it's not constitutionally mandated, but we do it because we have the data. It's useful, states expect it, and they need it, and we provide that service. So those are the two primary purposes. We then have all of the information that we distribute. In fact, we recently did a release of very highly detailed race and ethnicity data down to the census tract and even block level. That paints the portrait of who we are, because it's by up to 370 race ethnic combinations, and for 1,200 tribes, individual tribes, with really small tribes as well as large tribes, all the way down in terms of geography. So those are the really types of information that's used for decennial, for the decennial process.
And the dollar amounts that are allocated to different states, obviously it's based on the population in each state, but we know that there are some significant challenges, right? And what I've appreciated, I watched some of your videos, by the way, the YouTube videos. That I mean, they weren't all good, but no, but a few of them were worth watching. No, but
thanks.
you were very. No, I appreciated that you made these videos, right? Because for some people, that's the only way to really get the message across. It's through a video. But that you were trying to be really transparent about what the Census Bureau is doing well, and then what the challenges are. And I wonder if you could mention some of those challenges, especially when it comes to undercounting certain populations, because that's connected to federal dollars, and we know. We believe that, especially like here in Harris County, there are some hard to reach populations. Certainly, they were undercounted in the last census, and therefore we lost out on a lot of money. So tell us more about some of those challenges, as well as what you're trying to do to address those challenges. Sorry, this is a 3-part question, but I'll remind you along the way.
Yeah, because I forget.
Yeah. What are those challenges? Yeah, sorry. What are those challenges? What are you trying to do to address those challenges? And then most importantly, what can we do to help address those challenges, especially here? And I want to spend a lot of time talking about that, yeah.
Okay, what was the first question?
Yeah, what are those challenges, like in terms of, undercounting? You're just messing with me, right?
So I'm going to start out. See, I told you, after 2 questions, man, there's Colin. So let me start out by saying that the Census Bureau, it operates, it lives its values of scientific integrity, transparency, independence, objectivity. And because of that, when we do a census or a decennial census, the very next thing we do, as soon as we close the books, close the data collection, is we launch a large survey called a post-enumeration post-survey, to ask exactly the same questions that are on the census form. And then we compare what we got from that sample, which you can work a lot harder than you can a massive, 330 million population census. We compare those results against what we got from the census to find out, who did we get right? Who did we miss? Who did we include that we shouldn't have included? And then, nobody does this, folks, and then we publish the results for the American public. So that's something that's really important. And what happens is something that I don't think people get, so I'm going to tell you as sincerely as I can. Okay, ready? There has never been a census conducted by the United States or any country in the world that is perfect. Okay, they all have limitations. What we do is through our transparency and living our values, we provide you the information to understand the strengths and the limitations of that. So, and if any of you are data nerds, you'll understand what I'm going to say. There's not a single person who doesn't want to know, who's a data nerd, who doesn't want to know the strengths and the limitations of the data.
Right.
Why? Because it makes the data that you have more valuable. you know what to look out for. It's like buying a car. Where are the quirks? You want to know those before after you buy it, so you can work around it. So we do that, and that's basically part of who we are in terms of living our values.
Well, I really appreciate your efforts to be as transparent as possible, and that's true for all of us as researchers, or those of us at the Kinder Institute doing research.
Okay,
There's no such thing as a perfect research project. Right. Yeah, I was going to come back to you because you only answered the first part, but I just wanted to add on to that. Like, I really appreciate that, because we also try to do that. So it's just, I acknowledge that there's no such thing as a perfect research project, but make sure that we are as aware as possible of the limitations, and that we include those limitations in all our reports. So that's really great that y'all are doing that. Okay, so that was the first part of what the challenges are. That's a big challenge. But you're being transparent about it. But the second part is, what are you doing? I guess in a sense, one part of what you're doing is acknowledging those. And this time I could say bless you. I got it right. Acknowledging those limitations, but then what are you doing to try to, especially with the next census, right, 2030, to do a better job of counting people?
Okay, so thank you for that question as well. We when we do this post-enumeration survey, honestly, it's not so that we can understand who we missed and who we didn't in terms of undercounts. That's a byproduct of that, and it's very informative. The overarching purpose is to understand the limitations so that we can do research and create better methods for the next decennial census, as well as for our ongoing 130 surveys that we do. We can learn how to engender participation and do those types of things, create better methods that will capture that type of information. So that's pretty much our approach. So what was the question again?
And then the third question, or the third part of that question was, what can we do, we here in this room and here in the Houston region, what can we do to support the Census Bureau's efforts to do a better job in the next census, and to continually improve? Yeah. Just to make clear, it's not that I'm criticizing you. I mean, I am, but it's just like, hey, we're all trying to do better. I mean, especially because of the huge implications you just mentioned. But I would especially love to hear if you have any thoughts on what we can do as a community.
Well, yeah, there are a couple of things. One of the things that we realized, and it's unfortunately because of the pandemic, is that we cannot complete the census by ourselves. We need community engagement. We need your help. And as a result, we are launching a continuous engagement strategy where we are reaching out to all communities across the U.S., urban, rural, communities that we know are more likely to be undercounted than others, and working with them to get their ideas. We launched something called a Federal Register Notice, which basically says, please help us, give us your ideas, and we received over 8,000 ideas. So to bolster all of the other information that we're getting from, the post-enumeration study, we did a demographic analysis, we do all these assessments of the 2020. Add to that people's ideas externally to create a research agenda towards doing a better job next time. And the strategy that appears to be emerging, although it's not, we haven't finalized or put on paper the operational plan, because that's for next year, is one where we're going to leverage technology and available administrative records, recognizing that not everyone has access to, but not everyone is reflected in administrative records. But we're gonna capture the technology and administrative records to use those in a way that allows the easiest to count folks in the U.S. and households to be counted easy and inexpensively, so that we can take the remaining resources we have to focus on the historically undercounted populations. And that means working with communities with a lot of resources at our disposal to engage, to build trust, to work with partners like we've worked with in the Houston area, with the Houston Endowment and other folks. We have the Texas Census Institute folks here. And we will be developing strategies and working with them with sufficient resources so that we can really hone in on tailored approaches to different communities. So it's not it's not a matter of, oh, what do we, let's one size fits all. Let's train our folks to do a certain procedure in Louisiana for folks who are impoverished and think it's going to work everywhere. Each community has a unique perspective and culture, and we want to be able to do our messaging and our methods in a way that matches that and leverages the existing ecosystem, the networks of trusted messengers and partners, so that they can work and help us to communicate the message that it's good to participate in the census. It helps your community. And between now and the decennial census, we will be working to activate and tap into those existing resources and also selling the value proposition of the data that we collect. We have massive amounts of economic and social and population data. This data can absolutely help local community organizations understand their needs better, who their population is, do good public health planning, disaster relief planning, infrastructure planning, and we are developing use cases so that we can give examples of how in your community these data will help you, and that can actually help empower then the trusted messengers to then speak to people on the ground, to say, so that we have pastors talking to people and teachers talking to parents, saying it's good to participate in service.
That's great to think about the messaging and how we can build trust and just to help inform the community of how these data are used. And I was focusing on, bringing in federal dollars and congressional representation, but I have to, of course, mention that the Kinder Institute uses census data all the time for a lot of our work, and we combine it with other data that we collect locally, as well as data from many other sources. But one of the things that I should mention, the Houston population, let's talk a little bit about Houston. And the Houston population, as many of us know, has grown tremendously and changed tremendously. It's become not only much larger, but it's also become much more diverse. And this is something that our founding director, Steve Kleinberg, has talked a lot about the dramatic changes in our population. But one of the things that we know, given that there are certain populations that are undercounted and others that are overrepresented, we know that we have, for example, 1 in 4 people in the Houston area is foreign born. And we know, and that may be an underestimate, right? And because we know that many folks that are foreign born are undocumented, and they may not be so inclined to fill out a census form. And so what are some approaches for that specific scenario that we believe is particularly relevant for us in the Houston region because we have such a significant foreign population, many of whom are undocumented? What can we do to make sure that they are counted, that they participate in this process?
Okay, I'll start by saying the best information we can possibly collect in a decennial is information that is provided by the households, like self-response. People saying, here's my household, I'm filling out the form, I'm providing it to the census. That's the best quality data. And when we don't get that, we actually send people out to knock on doors. And sometimes people respond and they'll participate, and other times they'll just, turn out the lights and close the door and act like nobody's home or whatever. But what I can tell you, and it's kind of a myth and people don't always understand, is that failure to submit a form, the census form, doesn't mean that you're not counted. It means that we need to find some other way to fulfill our constitutional obligation to enumerate all the population. And we use other methods. Sometimes we use administrative records. Now, the historically undercounted population don't always have administrative records, and so we recognize that. But we can take care of sort of the easier non-responders by using administrative records. And then also we use something called proxy responses. If it's a apartment complex, we'll go to the landlord and we'll say, who lives in this household? And they will help us enumerate the total number of people and some of their characteristics. Another way is going, if it's like single family homes, go to neighbors and say who lives in the other household. We prefer not to do that because the quality of those reports is not as high as self-response or even administrative records. But if we know that a housing unit is occupied, we will find a way to come up with an enumeration for it. And so the undercounts that we see in our post-enumeration survey, that's often telling us how well we're doing at predicting using these proxy methods and other things, how well we did at filling in the information when people didn't respond, which is why we do everything we possibly can to get self-response. When it comes to the historically undercounted populations, the folks like the immigrants that just, they don't want to have nothing to do. We're not in a situation to judge. We're simply in a situation to ask because we believe it helps their community. That's where we need the partnership, the collaboration, the ideas, and the work from community partners to tap into those trusted networks to help us with the messaging, to help us get to the folks who could then talk to the, say, undocumented immigrant communities to say it's okay to participate.
That's great to hear. And I heard some reactions, some audible reactions when you talked about how, hey, we have other methods even if you don't fill out the survey. So that's really encouraging to hear. So in a few moments, we're going to start collecting the index cards. So if you've already written a question, great, pass them toward the aisles. And if you haven't, now's your chance to write down a question. But I want to ask one more question while you all do that. And that is, earlier you mentioned diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so I want to come back to that because it's a big topic. But in particular, and I wasn't kidding when I said I watched some of your YouTube videos. In one of your YouTube videos, you said that equity is not about looking at numbers. And this, from a statistician, I thought was fascinating to hear you say equity is not about looking at numbers. And so I wonder if you could say a little bit more about that, say why you made that statement, what that means, and especially because equity is an issue that we're thinking a lot about here in the Houston area in terms of an equity of resources, which in some ways is about looking at numbers. But you said it's not just about looking at numbers. Say more.
And it has to do with this notion. I think I talked about a little bit earlier of how I came to be a leader of the Census Bureau, and I used my whole self. The notion is that if you value diverse perspectives and you actively go out to include those diverse perspectives to gain insight to make better decisions, then you, at least us at the Census Bureau, will be achieving our mission at a higher level. We'll reach new levels of excellence that could not have been achieved otherwise. So that's kind of what I was getting at when I was saying that. Now, when it comes to numbers, I gave something that I like to call a policy speech about how diversity, equity, and inclusion principles were being implemented at the Census Bureau. And I said very distinctly, it's not about the numbers, because those principles, if you are meant to be absorbed into one's being, so that you in your everyday work, regardless of your race or ethnicity or gender or sex or whatever, you actively and automatically look for inclusion. Rather than sitting in your office and making a decision about a design or whatever, you seek that diverse perspective. You value it so much that when you go out and hire, you'll want to hire folks with very different perspectives, often from maybe different cultures and different races and ethnicities. So you can capture that for the purpose of achieving our mission of getting more accurate data. And that's why it's not about numbers. If you make it about numbers, then you get into this situation where you're doing check boxes. So, how do you achieve diversity, equity, and inclusion? Well, let's make everybody take courses, a training. We'll hire some business consultants, and they'll train our supervisors for diversity, equity, inclusion. Well, that's okay, but then what happens is people go through that, sometimes sleep through that, and you get to check a box that says X number of people have done that. X number of people now have done this, etc. That is all that's going to do is reinforce the current culture. Diversity, equity, inclusion is about changing the way you think about how you do your work and valuing those diverse perspectives, because you know that it's going to give you more accurate, more relevant data.
That's great. Thanks for that important reminder. And I love that it comes from a statistician.
Absolutely.
Who's saying it's not just about the numbers. So this is great. Okay, so we have some questions, and I keep forgetting. This is terrible. I think I'm in denial that I need reading glasses. So I don't always, thank you. I don't always bring my reading glasses. Perfect. Thank you. And this first question, that reminds me. You mentioned the Texas Census Institute, and so I'm going to read a question from Angela Broyles, who's here today.
Angela, where are you?
Hi, Angela. Thanks so much for being here. Angela, by the way, drove all the way from Dallas to be here today, so maybe he came for the furthest. So. And Angela is the founder and director of the Texas Census Institute, which is independent from the Census Bureau, but definitely trying to support these efforts to make sure we get the best count possible in the 2030 census. So Angela's question is, how does the Census Bureau plan to support states in their efforts to participate in the local update of census addresses, or LUCA, L-U-C-A, local update of census addresses?
Well, we have the program. We're going to be going through it.
Or maybe tell us a little bit about what that program is.
Yeah, the LUCA is an effort to make sure that we have a contemporaneous list of every address associated with the housing unit in the United States. And so what we do is we do this on a rolling basis. We always maintain, we get new permits, new construction permits, and when they're done, we add those addresses. But what we do is we take it to the next level, which is around mid-decade or so. I'm not quite sure what the timing is, but we take that list that we think is as complete as it can be, and then send those lists to every local government and invite them to review the list of all the addresses on their own and to see if they can identify housing units that were missed. And we will add them on. We'll verify them and then add them on. And it's been a relatively successful program in that in 2020, when we did the post-enumeration study, it basically ended up concluding that we neither overcounted nor undercounted housing units. Now that might vary from state to state, but on the whole, it seemed like we did okay. It's absolutely necessary because, like I said, we can't do this alone, and so we need the help of local jurisdictions, and their partners. Now, states and local government, they don't necessarily have the money to go out and sending out people to do addresses, so they actually rely oftentimes on local community partnerships as well to help to say, can you guys help us and do that? So that's basically the process.
All right. And what do you think of the debates around reclassifying Hispanic Latino as a racial category? Specifically, how do you feel about the concerns that this could lead to erasures of groups like Afro-Latinos?
Okay, so thank you for that question. I do not see the use of a single question. I'm going to answer it two ways. One is that the Census Bureau does not have any say in the decision on how we're going to revise race and how we capture race and ethnicity. That's the job of the Office of Management and Budget. Having said that, they recognize that we have a lot to offer in terms of the research that we've done and our expertise. So we worked with them on a work group that involved all the federal statistical agencies to come up with a recommendation that was then vetted with the public. There were months of invited feedback on things like, what about Afro-Latino and things of that sort. And they are now poised to make a decision sometime mid next year. I can tell you personally that my goal, what I would love to see, and it's going to happen, regardless of how they come out, I love to see people being able to tell their own story about who they believe they are in terms of race and ethnicity. Combining a single question that includes, Latino and, Mexicano and Chicano and all that, alongside, black, white, etc. I do not see that as forcing an ethnicity to be a race. I see it as a consolidated way of allowing people to tell their own story. Now, Rice University is an academic institution, and so there are lots of universities. It's the professors, it's the scholars who make the distinction between what is a race and what is an ethnicity.
The sociologists, to be exact.
Okay.
I just have to mention
Academic.
that, because I'm a sociologist.
Yeah, there you go.
No, but yes, we talk about this.
And because of that, we totally respect that. But being able to capture the raw data of who you are, I think, is the first step that can allow the sociologist or whoever to then code and collapse or do whatever they want in a way that is consistent with current scholarly perception or scholarly theory on what is a race and what is an ethnicity. So I happen to think that moving forward and allowing people to tell their story of whether they're Afro-Latino or whatever, that is the best way to capture information.
Well, I would say, as a sociologist, I have to chime in that sociologists would agree with you in that it's race and ethnicity are socially constructed concepts. So therefore, it should.
And the public doesn't understand the difference.
Yeah, well, that it should be based on how society defines it, and that's why the definitions vary over time and by place.
And by the way, there's no question that there was a need for a revision of how we ask race and ethnicity, because according to the 1997 version, which is still operational, we're obliged to use it. When we collapse race and ethnicity categories, under those rules, we have to mark people who are Middle Eastern or from Northern Africa as white. And we got a lot of pushback from that. And unfortunately, all we have to say is we are required by law to do that. I wish we could do otherwise.
Another question. Are you going to add the LGBTQ community back to the census in 2030?
It was never in the first place. So we aspire to be more inclusive and include that particular, SOGIs, sexual orientation and gender identity, we aspire to capture whatever measures that are deemed necessary. Now, Congress actually funded experimentation on capturing SOGI status of the American public through the American Community Survey, which actually is a much more relevant and useful database because it doesn't just count who you are and a few demographic variables. It also captures this rich treasure trove of socioeconomic data. So we're in the field right now asking the SOGI question, and then we'll be doing tests to see if the person that's designated to respond and tell us about all the members of their household can actually correctly capture the SOGI status of those folks, because that doesn't always happen.
Wow. Quick clarification question about something you said earlier during our conversation. You said that there are some groups that we shouldn't have included, or something along those lines. They want some clarification about who were you referring to, and I think I remember hearing you say that as well.
This had to do with the post-enumeration survey. So if you, I hate to use this negative
Just do it.
situation. So if somebody passed away before April 1st of Census Day, and then you receive the form and you include them, you shouldn't have included them.
I see, as an example.
And the same thing occurs if somebody left the country permanently. You shouldn't have included. So there are situations like that.
I see. All right. Does the Census Bureau sell data? Like, do corporations and institutions?
Never.
It's always free.
All of our products are free. And what happens sometimes is that corporations or companies think they can build a better mousetrap. And so they take our data, which is free, and then they present it in different ways or make some assumptions and create new indices and things of that sort, and they sell those products. And the public is free to buy those products, or simply, if they just need the data that we have available, get that for free.
And I just have to add, Kinder Institute data also available for free. Go to our website. Yes. We're very proud of that, even though it costs a lot of money to collect those data.
That's wonderful.
We see it as a public good. Yes, absolutely. What about counting the unhoused individuals? What do you do to try to reach them?
Yeah, we have a process during the decennial census where we have a count day where we assemble a field staff and we go out, and on that single day we count folks. Now, unless Tomas tells me otherwise, I believe what we do is we count everyone who is at a shelter. No, we actually go out into the streets too, right? Yeah, good. Yeah, and what happens actually is sometimes folks hear that who are unhoused and they leave the premises, and so it's really tough. We are looking to improve that. Like I said, we're not perfect. We aspire to perfection, and we actively are working on improving that, just along with all the other areas where we know there needs to be improvement.
What are the 3 most important changes that have been made since your arrival at the Census Bureau, i.e., since the Trump administration? That's what it says here. That's what the question says. But yeah, if you could point to maybe, the top most important changes that have been made since you arrived.
One of the things is that we're actively in a transformation and modernization mode. And so we're more deliberately moving towards, with the schedule, a single enterprise approach where we're creating something called a data lake and taking, we get like the Social Security numinant files, the Social Security number files, and the Medicare files and the Medicaid files and IRS information. And we also do all of our surveys and the decennial census. We're putting all of that information, including the economic data. We have a massive jobs database, and we do census of businesses. putting all those things into a single data lake and linking them all together. And it's producing these amazing data sets that can be used for really innovative research. One of the things we're doing that actually colleges might be interested in is we have, just to give you a flavor, a product called Post-Secondary Education Outcomes, which really means what happens to your kids after they graduate from college. And so we have, right now it's with a little under 1,000 institutions across the country. We're looking to build it up. But we take the historic records that universities provide for their graduates, like the name, the degree, et cetera, the year they graduated, et cetera. And we then match that to the American Community Survey, the jobs data, things of that sort. And we can come up with estimates of what is your kid, if they graduate with a BA in music, what is their annual income after a year? How about after 5 years? How about after 10 years? What if they get a master's in statistics? What do they, from that institution even, how much would they make after a year, after 5 years, after 10 years? It's a really valuable resource that people don't know about. So I'm telling you.
All right. What's the ethnic composition of the Census Bureau's workforce?
It's interesting. We do, you can write this down if you want, something called a 715 report every year. And it looks at the ethnic composition of all of our staff, all of our career staff. And it separates them by the field interviewers and the temporary field interviewers and field supervisors who are all remote and they work to do the surveys. And then our career staff who are in offices virtually or otherwise, crunching the numbers, doing the support work, et cetera, and does statistics separately from them. And what we do is we compare those distributions by race and ethnicity to a standard that's mandated by the Equal Opportunity Office. And I forget what the standard is, but it's maybe like CPS, current population survey data on the employed. And we look at the difference between our representation, say, of Hispanic males to that in the target. They call it a target. And we actually do pretty well for most categories. What we find, though, is that as you go up the scale, there's this large GS scale from GS like 5s or something all the way up to GS 15s, and then senior executive service and above. When you go up that scale, we at the highest levels, we have diversity, but it doesn't match that of the general population. And you wouldn't necessarily expect it to, but we're always looking. We know that we need to do better at that, and we're actively working. We actually do really good up to level 14 and 15. And then when you get into the senior executive service, because out of 9,000 people at the Census Bureau, there are only 62 of those positions, it's really tough to match the racial ethnic composition to a general population with 100 million people in it. But that's okay. Well, we're still working on it. We do have I think a really nice representation of African Americans and Latinos and Asians. We have some in all of our categories, just not at the levels that we would want at the highest.
Last two questions. One is, when can we expect to see the boots on the ground from the Census Bureau as we gear up for the 2030 census operations?
You see boots on the ground all the time with our American Community Survey, which is technically considered part of the census, the decennial census. It's something called what used to be the long form. So when we did a decennial census back in the old days, every 10th or 5th household would get not only the decennial census form, but an additional form where you had to fill out all the stuff from the American Community Survey. We figured out rather than collecting that once every 10 years, why not do it continuously? So every year we do 3 or 4 million households, random sample, different ones, each year across the 10 years. And then, and that is basically part of the decennial census. We also do this 130 other surveys. We do the economic census of businesses. So there's literally boots on the ground all the time. For the decennial census, though, probably boots on the ground will be sometime in 2030 after, we'll be hiring way before that, but the boots on the ground will be a few weeks into April, after April 1st.
Okay, so
Although
April.
that's subject to change.
Okay. And then last question. Does the U.S. Census Bureau collaborate with state governments? And are there state policies which can facilitate or impede the U.S. Census Bureau's activities? In other words, how is Texas doing?
What's that? Oh,
That's my interpretation of
okay,
this.
so you might be thinking, oh, well, Texas didn't really put out some funds to help with the count. California put 200 million.
Yeah, and Texas did not. So
Texas did not. Okay, so listen to me really, really closely, because you might be surprised at what you're going to hear.
surprise us.
No state should have to put out a single penny to get a full enumeration of the population. That's a mandate, constitutional mandate from the Constitution to the Census Bureau. We need to be able to do that without relying on state funds. And we prepare each census, decennial census, we prepare to do it without any state's help. If they want to help, absolutely. But if they don't, we are committed to giving the absolute highest quality level data. Having said that, I said earlier, we cannot do it alone. We need collaboration, partnerships with the communities. So in that sense, states, if you looked at the contributions that community organizations are providing in their assistance, that's one, I wouldn't quantify that, and I wouldn't even say they should have to do anything. I'll just say that we very much rely on and appreciate and want to work with us together to achieve the highest level census. And we will take whatever additional help we can get from states if they want to give it. And if they don't, we're going to count everyone anyway.
So on that note, I do want to say I strongly, strongly encourage all of you, which I think it kind of goes without saying because you're here tonight, but we see filling out the census as a civic duty. This is not unlike voting, and we just voted, right? So it's not unlike voting or jury duty or those kinds of activities that we can take up on behalf of our community, right? This is huge. This is super, super important. So thank you for being here. Thank you for informing us about the census and its importance. And before we thank you through applause, I do want to say, I want to remind everyone that the Kinder Institute is having its annual luncheon. We already have the date for next year, for May 20th of 2024. So please mark your calendars. In this year's luncheon, we had over 1,000 people. So we want as many people there as possible for that luncheon. We're going to hear the 43rd annual survey of the Kinder Houston Area Survey. And so I can't imagine doing as many surveys as the Census Bureau does, but we have some idea of how hard that is. So mark your calendars, May 20th. We will also be honoring Dr. Mark Boom, who is the CEO of Houston Methodist. So he will be honored at this year's luncheon. So with that, thank you so much, Rob, for being here. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone.
And thank you all.